Rain in the city of Valcrest did not arrive quietly. It came the way bad news comes, fast, certain, and without any real concern for whether you were ready. It hammered the pavements and turned the gutters into small rushing rivers, and made every person caught outside feel personally targeted. The sky had been gray since morning, the kind of gray that sat low and heavy and made the buildings look smaller. And by 8 o'clock that Tuesday evening it had decided to stop hinting and start committing. People ran. Umbrellas flipped inside out. Taxis disappeared the way taxis always do when the weather gets serious. La Stella restaurant on Creston Avenue held its warmth against the storm like a closed fist. Dark red curtains in the windows. Candles on every table, small and gold. A smell that had soaked into the walls over years of good cooking. Butter and garlic and something sweet underneath, like the kitchen itself had a memory. Every table was full. The noise was the particular noise of a packed room on a wet night. Overlapping conversations, the scrape of chairs, the musical clatter of cutlery against plates, and underneath all of it, the low comfortable hum of people who were glad to be indoors. Rosa Chun had been on her feet since noon. She was not the kind of person who complained about this out loud, but she had a private system for tracking it. Every hour she checked the clock above the kitchen door and did the math. Hours worked times hourly rate, minus tax, plus average tips for a Tuesday, divided by what Tommy needed that week. Tonight the equation included school shoes. The ones he had outgrown 2 months ago and was still wearing because the replacement ones had not yet cleared the budget. She carried the number in her head the way she carried her tray, balanced and deliberate, aware of its weight at every moment. She was 28. Brown eyes that moved quickly and noticed things before the rest of her face caught up. Dark hair that had been neatly pinned at noon and was now making its own architectural decisions. Hands that were fast and certain and had the particular kind of strength that comes not from training but from years of carrying things without being allowed to drop them. She had been at La Stella for 3 years and she knew it the way you know a place when you have given it enough of yourself. Every table number, every regular's preference, the light above the bar that flickered in cold weather, the chair at table 9 that would wobble if you sat on the right side. And the fact that Chef Angelo put extra cheese on her staff meal every Friday without being asked, because he said she looked like someone who needed it. Tommy needed the shoes. Rosa needed the tips. The clock said 43 minutes left in the shift. These were the facts she moved through. She was clearing table 4 when the sound happened. Not a dramatic sound. Not the kind that appears in stories to announce that everything is about to change. Just a short, swallowed gasp, half breath, half thud. And then the man at table 7 was on the floor. He was old. White hair, broad hands, a face built for kindness. He had been eating alone with a newspaper folded into quarters, and now the newspaper was on the floor and he was on his back and the color in his face was going wrong. The restaurant responded the way crowds respond to sudden reality. A 3-second freeze, a ripple of standing bodies, someone pulling out a phone and pointing it instead of using it, the manager appearing from the back with his hands slightly raised and his eyes searching the room for someone to take charge. Rosa was already moving. She did not think through the decision. There was no decision. She dropped her cloth on the nearest table and cut through the gap between chairs, not bumping a single one, and was on her knees on the cold tile floor before anyone else had figured out which direction to step. 2 fingers to his neck. The pulse was wrong, absent in the way that matters. She tilted his chin, linked her fingers together, placed both hands on his chest, and started. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counted out loud. Not for the audience, for herself, for the count, because the count was everything. Her arms were tired from 8 hours of carrying and it did not matter. The tile was cold against her knees and it did not matter. People were filming and the manager was saying ambulance, ambulance, someone call, and none of it mattered. She talked to the man at the same time, quietly, just under the count, telling him to stay, telling him the ambulance was coming, telling him with the complete and unhesitating certainty of someone who had already decided what the ending was going to be. All he had to do was agree. 17. 18. 19. The door opened. Not politely. The door of La Stella opened the way it opens when the person arriving has never once had to negotiate with a door. Pushed fully without drama, because drama implies uncertainty and this person had none. The rain came in with him briefly, a gust and a scattering of drops, and then the door closed and Marco Bellini was standing in the entrance of the restaurant. He was tall in a way that was not just measurement. It was posture, stillness, the specific quality of someone who had walked into 1,000 rooms and never once wondered if the room wanted him. Long dark coat, black fitted, collar turned up. Dark hair, slightly wet at the edges from the walk between the car and the door. A face that people describe differently depending on which side of the Bellini family they had been on, sharp jaw, dark eyes. A mouth that looked like it had stopped practicing smiles sometime in the last decade. 34 years old and every year visible not in lines but in the way he carried himself, like someone who had made many difficult choices and had stopped apologizing for any of them. 3 men came in behind him. Silver was the closest, always a half step back and to the left, lean and quiet, gray eyes that recorded everything without appearing to. Silver had been with Marco for 11 years, and in those 11 years had mastered the art of existing in a room without disturbing it. What happened to La Stella in the moment Marco Bellini walked in was not dramatic noise. It was the opposite. The noise did not stop, it compressed. Conversations lowered. Eyes found plates. Bodies angled slightly away. The room did not go silent so much as it went careful. The way a room goes careful when something that requires carefulness has entered it. Everyone in Waitress knew the name Bellini. Most of them hoped to keep it at the level of knowing and not the level of personal experience. Marco took one step inside. And stopped. Not because of the careful room. Not because of the silence or the staring. Because of the woman on the floor in the apron with the smear on the front and the half-undone hair. Pressing on a stranger's chest with both hands, arms straight, counting aloud, talking quietly, refusing in the most complete and total way he had ever witnessed anyone refuse anything. Something happened inside Marco's chest. It came from very far back. 24 years back to be exact, though he did not do that math consciously. It arrived the way old things arrive, without announcing themselves, as a feeling before it was a memory. A garden. A different city. A woman in a good dress crouching in the dirt, holding something small and hurt in both hands, talking to it. Not giving up. Choosing to stay with something fragile because leaving was unthinkable to her. Because she was built in a way that made abandonment impossible. His mother, in that garden with that bird when Marco was 10 years old and still believed the world was mostly kind. The woman on the floor had the same posture. The same absolute forward lean. The same quality of focus that shut out everything that was not the thing directly in front of her that needed help. He heard himself say something. The words arrived before he had approved them, pulled up from that deep unguarded place. "That's my mother." And then he stopped himself, blinked, looked at the woman on the floor and understood that he had been confused for one raw and unprotected second, that the memory had been so physical and so sudden that it had crashed through the wall between then and now. The woman on the floor was not his mother. His mother had been gone for 24 years. But something in the shape of what this woman was doing had reached inside him and found the exact wound, the exact geography of an old loss, and pressed on it with the precision of something that knew exactly where to go. Silver looked at him. One raised eyebrow. The most Silver ever did with his face. Marco said nothing. He stood and watched. The ambulance arrived. The paramedics took over with the speed and focus of people who do this every day. Mr. Fausto, his name was Mr. Fausto, a retired baker who had been eating at table 7 every Tuesday for 11 years, was lifted onto a stretcher and taken into the rain. The doctor at the hospital would say later that the compressions had been correct, consistent, and timely. That the man's heart had been kept going by someone who had not panicked, not hesitated, not made a single wrong decision under pressure. That whoever had been on that floor had made the difference between a story with a good ending and one without. The restaurant came back to itself gradually. The manager was clapping and then everyone was clapping, and Rosa stood up from the cold floor with red knees and tired arms, and the mildly embarrassed expression of someone who cannot understand why people are looking at them for doing what anyone would have done. She fixed her apron. She picked up her cloth from where she had dropped it. She went back to work, refilling water, checking tables, smiling at a customer who was being difficult about the menu, moving through the restaurant with the same steady tiredness she had carried all evening, as if the last 20 minutes had been simply another item on a long list of things to get through. Marco sat down at the corner table, the dark one in the back, where the candlelight was lowest and the sightlines covered the whole room. He did not order. He just sat. Silver positioned himself and waited in the particular way Silver waited, present and absent at the same time. Marco watched Rosa work for 40 minutes. He watched her balance 4 plates at once across the width of the room without hesitating. He watched her crouch down to talk to a small child at one of the tables, at the child's eye level, laughing at whatever the child said. He watched her wipe down a table that was already clean, doing it anyway because the habit of being useful did not have an off switch. He watched her laugh at something Angelo said through the kitchen window, a quick, bright laugh, here and gone before she noticed she had let it out. He had been in this city his whole life. He had sat in rooms with senators and criminals and everyone in between. He had made decisions that moved money and power across the map of Waitress like pieces on a board. He had done all of this, and in the course of all of it, he had become someone who watched the world at a distance that felt most of the time like safety. 40 minutes of watching a woman in an apron work a restaurant shift did something to the distance. "Find out her name," he said to Silver quietly, without looking away from the room. Silver pulled out his phone. The rain kept coming down outside against La Stella's red-curtained windows, and Marco Bellini sat very still in his corner with the photograph in his jacket pocket, the one of his mother, small and worn at the edges, that he had carried every day since he was 10, and felt something behind his ribs beginning to do something it had not done in a very long time. He did not have a name for it yet. He did not need one yet. 2 days later, Rosa was at the morning market on Beller Street with both hands full of grocery bags when the black car with the dark windows pulled up slowly beside her. She did not run. This is worth stating again because it says everything about who Rosa-chan was. She was nervous, genuinely nervous, with a bag of tomatoes in one hand and bread in the other and no obvious exits, and she did not run. She stopped walking. She looked at the car. She waited. Marco stepped out. In morning light he looked different in small ways and the same in the ways that mattered. Different coat, lighter, still dark. Same face, same stillness. He looked at her the way he had looked at her across the restaurant, like a person trying to solve something that did not have a straightforward method. Rosa shifted the grocery bag to her other hand. She looked at him for 1 full second. "If you are going to kidnap me," she said, "at least let me text my brother first." Marco stopped. In 11 years, Silver had never once seen Marco Bellini not know what to do next in a conversation. Silver was watching from the car window and quietly filed this moment away. Marco told her about Mr. Fausto. He told her that Fausto was known to his family, that the man was well and asking after the woman who had helped him. He held out the envelope. Thick. The kind of thick that everyone understands without opening. Rosa looked at the envelope for a long time. Long enough that it could have seemed like considering. She was not considering. She was making sure her hands would not shake when she pushed it back. She pushed it back. "I did not save him for money," she said. "I saved him because it was right." Marco held the envelope. No one in his life had ever returned one. The situation had no instruction manual. He stood on a street in the rain-cleaned morning air with an envelope no one wanted and felt, for the first time in years, uncertain about what came next. "Can I buy you coffee instead?" he said. It came out a little clumsy, which was its own small miracle. "Fine," Rosa said. "But I picked the place." She took him to Cup and Carry on Nander Street. 6 tables. Mismatched chairs. Walls painted the color of old mustard. A woman named Mrs. Oat behind the counter who made hot chocolate that people came back for in August because some things were worth the irrationality. The cups were thick ceramic with chips in the handles and the chairs wobbled on the left side. The smell was cocoa and sugar, and the specific warmth of a room that had been making people comfortable for a long time. Marco Bellini, in his coat and his impossible shoes, sat in a wobbly chair and wrapped his hands around a chipped mug and took a sip of hot chocolate and looked like a man who had been placed in a situation that no amount of money or power had prepared him for. He took another sip. They talked. They talked about Mr. Fausto and his 11 years of Tuesdays and his newspaper folded into quarters. They talked about the market on Beller Street and whether Tommy would accept whichever chocolate she had bought or have opinions about it. Marco said carefully that children always have opinions. Rosa looked at him. He said he had been one once. She let that sit without pulling at it, which was the right thing to do, and she seemed to know it without being told. When Rosa stood to leave, she noticed that he had finished all of the hot chocolate, and that by the last few minutes of the conversation he had been sitting slightly less like a building and slightly more like a person. She did not point this out. She picked up her bags and said goodbye and walked back up Nander Street with the morning around her, and the number for Tommy's shoes still in her head. She did not know, walking home, that a photograph of them at the table in Cup and Carry was already in the hands of 2 men on the south side of Valcrest who had been looking for something they could use. She did not know yet. But the city, which had its own way of keeping score, already knew. Marco came back to La Stella the following week. He sat in Rosa's section. He ordered the soup, not because it was what he wanted, but because it was the least expensive thing on the menu, and he had understood, without being told, that the envelope had been refused partly because the scale of the gesture had been wrong, and he did not intend to make that mistake again. He ate the soup slowly. He left a tip that was generous and not theatrical. Silver sat 2 tables away and read something on his phone and performed imperfectly the role of a person who was just there for the food. Rosa brought the soup. She refilled the water without being asked. She did not make anything of the fact that he was there. But she looked at him when she passed. Just a glance, just the real one, the unguarded one that she had not decided to give before it arrived. He came back Thursday, and the following Monday, and the Monday after that. Chef Angelo noticed on the second visit and announced his observations to Rosa through the kitchen window in a voice that was technically a whisper only in the sense that it was directed at one person. He said the man in the corner looked at her like a person who had not eaten in years and had mistakenly ordered soup when what he actually needed was something else entirely. Rosa told Angelo to add more pepper to the broth and mind the pots. Angelo added the pepper. The minding of pots did not happen. What built between them in those weeks was not the kind of thing that arrives with a moment. It was the kind that accumulates, the way water finds the shape of a container, the way something takes hold when it is given enough time and enough consistency. It was made of small pieces. He remembered, without being told again, that she took her coffee black. She started leaving his water glass full before he noticed it was empty. He told her about the city, the architecture, the old buildings, the history of the bridge on Vell Street, the mismatched window on the theater's third floor, and talked about these things like someone who had watched the world very carefully for a long time from a distance that was close enough to see but far enough not to touch. Rosa told him about cooking, what she made for Tommy on weekends, the recipes her mother had shown her, the birthday cake that had somehow been burnt and raw at the same time. He listened to the birthday cake story with more genuine attention than most men brought to anything, and when it was over he looked like he might be about to smile, which was still at this point a rare and notable event. He started smiling more as the weeks moved. Not the occasional slow surprise smile of the early visits, something more frequent, something that came with less effort, like a door being used enough that the hinges remember what they are for. And then the evening Rosa was in the back hallway of La Stella, just past the kitchen door, with her back against the wall and a piece of paper in her hand and her eyes red and her shoulders up near her ears. She was not making noise. Rosa had learned somewhere along the way to cry quietly and quickly, because there was always something waiting on the other side of it that needed doing. The piece of paper was from her landlord. The number on it had changed, not a little but enough. Enough that the careful equation she ran in her head every few days had stopped balancing. She had 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, she and Tommy would need somewhere else to be, and somewhere else was not something she had a plan for yet. Marco came in through the staff entrance. He nearly walked past her. He stopped. He looked at the paper. He looked at her face. He stood very still for a moment with his phone in his hand and the ability and the money to fix this problem in under 10 minutes, and he felt the memory of the envelope she had pushed back, and he put the phone away. He sat down on the floor of the hallway. Right there, coat and all, on the cold floor outside the kitchen door with the noise of Angelo's pans coming through the wall. Rosa looked down at him, surprised enough that the crying paused. "Tell me about Tommy," he said. She told him. She told him about the jokes before the punchline every single time without fail, because Tommy found himself funnier than anyone and was not wrong. The flashlight that was not for fear. The comics organized first by hero and then by storyline, a system Tommy had developed himself and defended with the seriousness of a scholar. The serial chosen entirely by the cartoon on the box. The way he still held her hand crossing busy streets even though he was 8 and had opinions about being treated like a baby, because holding hands was not babyish, it was just practical according to Tommy. The morning alarm. The 5:30 start. The shoes. Their mother just at the edges. The shape of that loss. The weight of the promise. The way it had settled into Rosa's bones not as a burden but as something she had chosen so completely it had become simply who she was. Marco listened. All of it. Every word. The hallway was quieter when she finished. She had ended up on the floor too at some point, the paper folded in her lap. Marco said, not looking at anything in particular, "I slept with a flashlight under my pillow for 2 years after my mother died. I told everyone it was for reading." Rosa turned to look at him. He looked back. Something moved between them in that hallway that had not been there before, or rather, something that had been building quietly for weeks reached the surface and became visible, the way things do when someone finally says a real thing out loud. It was not comfortable. Real things rarely are at first. But it was true, which was better than comfortable in the long run. They did not put words to it that night. Rosa went back to work. Marco left through the staff door. But something had been said on the floor of that hallway that both of them carried home. 10 days later, Tommy got sick at school. A bad cold. The nurse made that clear on the phone, nothing dangerous, but he needed to go home and rest and someone needed to come for him. The call arrived in the middle of the lunch rush while Rosa had 3 tables waiting and a tray balanced and no hands free for anything except what was already in them. She answered it in the 30-second window between the kitchen and table 6 and felt her stomach do what it always did when the school number appeared. A fast, cold drop like a step that wasn't there. She called Tommy's friend's mother. No answer. The neighbor, Mrs. Asante. Out. 2 more numbers from the contacts her phone had memorized as the backup plan. She was on the 4th attempt when Marco appeared at the staff door, which had gradually become a thing he did when he had business nearby. Stopping in, finding a reason, not examining the reason too closely. He took one look at her face and said, "What is it?" She told him in 20 words. He turned to Silver. Silver was on his phone before Marco finished the sentence. 15 minutes later, Silver arrived at Tommy's school with paperwork in order. The authorization, the emergency contact details, everything correct, and brought Tommy, bundled in Silver's own jacket because the boy had not worn a coat and the day had turned cold, to the Bellini Medical Center on the north side of Waitress. Rosa arrived 40 minutes later, running the last 3 blocks because the bus had been slow and she did not have the patience for slow. Tommy was in a warm room with a blanket and a juice cup and a doctor who had already completed 2 assessments and was saying very calmly that it was a cold. A proper one, the kind that needed rest and fluids and a few days away from school. But just a cold. Rosa stood in the doorway and breathed. Then she looked at the room. The room with the small brass letters on the wall. The quality of the quiet, the kind that costs something. The doctor who moved with the confidence of someone whose time was worth more per hour than Rosa made in a week. She looked at all of it, and she looked at the name on the door, and she took out her phone in the hallway and typed the full name from the authorization form. She read. She read enough. 3 articles. A court document summary. A photograph taken outside a building she recognized. Words like alleged and family operations and untouchable. Words that, taken together, formed a picture of who Marco Bellini actually was in Waitress. Not the man who sat in the wobbly chair with the chipped mug. Not the man on the hallway floor who had told her about the flashlight. But the version of him that the city had been careful around for 20 years. She stood in the hallway outside Tommy's room and read until she felt completely steady. This took longer than she would have liked. Marco arrived 20 minutes later. He came alone. No Silver, no one else. He walked down the hallway and when he saw Rosa standing still and calm outside Tommy's door, he stopped 6 feet away. In his life he had stood across from men who intended him specific harm and had not flinched. Rosa's face, not angry, not frightened, just waiting with complete steadiness, stopped him 6 feet from her like a physical thing. She held up her phone. He looked at the screen. He looked back at her. "Who are you really?" she asked. And Marco told her. He did not manage the delivery. He did not use the careful, constructed language of someone who had thought about how this conversation would go. He said. He ran the Bellini family. He had done so since he was 22, when his father died and someone had to, and the choice had been him. The business involved things he would not pretend were simple. People were afraid of him and he had used that fear deliberately for a long time. He said he had not told her because she was the only person in recent memory who looked at him and saw a person first. Not the name. Not the history. Not the careful distance that everyone else maintained. Just a person sitting in a wobbly chair, confused by a chipped mug, a little bit lost and not yet ready to admit it. "And how does everyone else look at you?" Rosa said. He said, "Like I am not a person." The hallway held the silence for a moment. Rosa went into Tommy's room. She picked up his jacket. She told him warmly and calmly that they were going home to rest. She thanked the doctor. She walked past Marco without stopping. She did not shout. She did not throw the phone. She did not perform any of it. She just left, with her brother's hand in hers, and Marco stood alone in the corridor of his own family's medical center, and felt something that no difficult conversation in a boardroom or across a negotiating table had ever managed to produce: the specific and terrible feeling of having opened a door you had kept closed for years, and then watching someone walk away from it. 3 days of silence. On the fourth morning, Rosa was half a block from Tommy's school gate when 2 large men stepped out from beside a parked car. They were the kind of large that is not accidental, built for the purpose of being noticed and taken seriously. They did not touch anyone. One handed Rosa a folded note. The other smiled in a way that had nothing friendly in it. They got back in the car and drove away. Tommy had gone completely still beside her, which was the loudest signal Tommy was capable of sending. Rosa unfolded the note. Tell Bellini to walk away from the East Docks deal by Friday. The waitress and the little brother have a very bad week if he doesn't. The Drago family. She folded it back into her pocket. She smoothed her face. She looked at Tommy and put the ordinary expression back on. The one that said everything was fine and these things happen and there was nothing to worry about. Who were those men? Tommy asked. Nobody important, Rosa said. You'll be late. She walked him to the gate. She watched him go through. She stood on the pavement for 30 full seconds after the gate closed, alone in the morning air, not moving. Then she took out her phone and she called Marco. He answered on the first ring. The first one. She read him the note. The silence on his end lasted 4 seconds. In conversation, for seconds is almost nothing. In this one it was everything, the sound of something reorganizing itself at speed, going from whatever it had been before the call into something focused and very, very still. Don't go to work tomorrow, he said. Don't leave the apartment. I am handling it. I am not hiding in my apartment, Marco. A pause. Then I am coming to you. He arrived with Silver and 2 others, and he had a plan ready before he knocked. Somewhere safe, people he trusted completely, logistics already in motion. He had built it in the 40 minutes between the call and the door because that was what he did, that was the machinery of the life he had. He solved things by controlling the perimeter. Rosa said no. What followed was a real argument. Not a performance, not 2 people being careful. Both of them were frightened and neither of them showed it in the expected direction. Marco got quieter and sharper. Rosa got steadier and more precise. He said she did not understand what the Drago family was capable of. She said she understood very well what people were capable of, and she also understood the difference between being protected and being managed. This is different, Marco said. Rosa looked at him. Why? Because now you care? Where were you every other time it was hard? The room went completely still. Marco stopped. Not because the words were unfair, they were not unfair. They were accurate, and accuracy from someone you have started to trust lands with a particular weight. He had arrived with his plan and his people and his ability to move her and Tommy like variables in an equation, and he had not once thought about the fact that before him there had been nobody. Just Rosa. Rosa and her 5:30 alarm and her tired arms and her clock calculations and her absolute refusal to stop. He sat down. He put his face in his hands. When he looked up, he looked like someone who had been a building for so long that he had forgotten buildings were made by people and could come down. I have not cared about anything in a long time, he said. I forgot what it felt like. Now I remember and I am terrified. Rosa sat down across from him. Tommy, ear to the door of his room, comic forgotten, listened to every word. Me too, Rosa said. After that night, things had a different texture. Not easier. Different problems do not become smaller problems just because you have decided to face them together. But there was a quality of honesty in the air of Rosa's apartment that had not been there before, the kind that comes when two people stop managing their words and start simply saying them. Changed how the rooms felt. It changed how they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table with the cardboard under the short leg. Marco told her everything. Not summaries, not edited versions, not the shape of the truth with the difficult parts removed. He told her about the East Docks, 2 years of work, what they represented, why the Drago brothers wanted to prevent it. He told her about the Drago family's particular brand of recklessness, which was more dangerous in some ways than straightforward power because reckless people do not calculate consequences before they act. He told her the note to her and Tommy was a pressure move, a deliberate choice to find something Marco valued enough to back down for. He told her all of this looking at her face. Rosa listened the way she always listened, entirely without interrupting, taking the full shape of a thing before she responded. When he was done, she said, "What do you want to do? Not what will you do? Not what should I expect? What do you want?" Asking him to be a person in the conversation, not a boss delivering a briefing. Marco said, "I want to meet them publicly. Give up the docs. End it clean." Rosa was quiet for a moment. 2 years of work. Yes. For us. He looked at her steadily. Yes. Silver, standing in the hallway, made a sound too small to be called a sound. It was more of a shift, the silver equivalent of profound emotion. Rosa got up and put the kettle on. She made tea in the quiet kitchen while the city did its nighttime things outside the window, sirens in the distance, a car alarm starting and stopping, the particular breathing of a city that never fully sleeps. She set a cup in front of Marco and sat back down. "You are not doing this alone," she said. "Tell me what I can actually do." And so they planned together. Marco laid out the structure. Silver contributed logistics from the hallway, because Silver could not actually stay in the hallway and not contribute. It went against something fundamental in him. Rosa asked questions that came from a different angle because she was not thinking about territory or leverage but about what could go wrong for a person, which is a different kind of thinking entirely and often the more useful kind when the thing you are actually trying to protect is a person. Tommy was eventually brought into the kitchen and given warm milk and a version of the situation that was honest but scaled to 8 years old. Some people were being unfair and the adults were sorting it out. Tommy accepted this, sat at the corner of the table, and listened with the focused attention of someone who took the role of witness very seriously. At one point he said with complete gravity, "You should have a backup plan. The heroes always have a backup plan." No one disagreed with this. Silver wrote something in his notes. The night before the meeting had the specific quality of nights before important things. Not restful, not peaceful, but held. Everyone in the apartment moved carefully, as if the air had agreed to stay still in exchange for nobody making it worse. Tommy could not sleep. He came out of his room in pajamas with his flashlight, for checking something in the kitchen, obviously, not because of the dark, and found Marco at the table alone. The apartment was quiet except for the city outside. The only light was the small one above the stove, and the narrow bars of orange streetlight coming through the blinds, and the beam of Tommy's flashlight cutting across the floor before Tommy clicked it off and climbed into the chair beside Marco without asking if he was interrupting. Because he was 8 and that question had not yet become a habit. He looked at what Marco was looking at. A photograph, small, a little worn at the corners. Black and white. A woman mid-laugh with dark eyes and the specific look of someone for whom laughing was not a performance but a state of being. Beside her, a small boy holding her hand. The boy had Marco's jaw. "Is that your mom?" Tommy asked. "Yes," Marco said. Tommy studied the photograph with the careful focus he gave to things that mattered. She looks like she would let you have cereal for dinner if you asked right. Marco looked at the boy beside him. The way children arrived at the exact true thing without trying was something that could not be taught or learned. She would have, he said. She thought rules about food were mostly suggestions. Tommy nodded, deeply approving. Mine was nice too. Our mom. He said it plainly, the way children state true things, without the protective wrapping adults develop over time for painful facts. Rosa looks like her sometimes, when she thinks nobody is watching. Marco looked at the hallway that led to Rosa's room. He looked at it for a moment without speaking. Are you going to stay? Tommy asked. Directly, as if the question had a straightforward yes or no. Marco was quiet for long enough that the quiet said something. Then, I want to. If your sister lets me. Tommy considered this with genuine seriousness, the way he considered comic plot lines and serial rankings, as things that deserved proper thought. You should bring her flowers. The yellow ones at the market stand, the long ones. She says they are too expensive, and then she stops to smell them every single time when she thinks I'm not looking. Marco looked at the boy in his pajamas with his flashlight tucked under his arm and his mother's kindness in his face. Thank you, Marco said. He meant it more completely than he had meant most things in years. Tommy gave a single nod, businesslike, and took his flashlight back to his room. Marco sat at the table for a while with the photograph. Then he put it back in his jacket pocket and something settled in him. Not the cold kind of settling, not the closing off kind, but the warm kind. The kind that comes when someone finally decides to stop treating an open door like a danger. Harlan Square at noon was open in every direction. That was the point. Marco had chosen it specifically because nothing could happen there without an audience, and the Drago family, for all their recklessness, understood what audiences meant for everyone involved. Marco arrived on time. He came without weapons. Silver had been awake for over a day and a half and was performing calm the way an actor performs calm when they are extremely not calm. The Drago brothers arrived 4 minutes late. 2 of the 3, the youngest, handled other matters. Dario, the eldest, led them across the square. Wide face, flat eyes, the walk of someone who has always moved through spaces expecting them to accommodate him. Dario looked at Marco. He looked at the absence of weapons. He looked at the simplicity of the arrangement. He had been expecting something else, a trick, a trap, the particular complicated chess that Marco Bellini was known for. He had not been expecting this. You actually came, he said. I said I would, Marco said. Dario studied him the way you study something that has not behaved the way it was supposed to. You're giving up the docs. Yes. 2 years of work. I know how long it has been. A pause. Dario had spent his whole life in a world where every decision was about money or power or territory, and the architecture of that world did not have a place for what he was looking at. A man voluntarily surrendering 2 years of strategic effort without being cornered, without being outplayed, without any of the usual reasons. For a waitress, Dario said, and the word carried contempt the way a tool carries its purpose, built into it, inseparable from it. Marco looked at him without changing his expression. For the right reason, he said. There is a difference. He let that land. Then he laid out the terms. The East Docks, all of it, the full agreement, the access they had been contesting for 2 years, transferred. The plans for the southern terminals ended. In return, Rosa-chan and Tommy-chan were outside this world permanently. Never approached, never threatened, never looked at sideways. If anything happened to either of them, anything from any direction at any time, the agreement ended and everything that came after was the Drago family's to carry. Dario was quiet. He was thinking Rosa style, not about territory but about the person across from him, what had changed in him, what this meant about who Marco Bellini was now versus who he had been before a rainy Tuesday in a restaurant on Creston Avenue. "You're not what I thought you were," Dario said finally. "No," Marco agreed. "I'm not." Hands were shaken in the open air of Harlan Square with the city going about its business around them and pigeons walking between their feet like they owned the square, which in every practical sense they did. Silver let out a breath on the perimeter that he had been carrying for 36 hours. That evening Marco knocked on Rosa's door like an ordinary person knocking, not the knock of ownership or urgency, just a knock that waited to see what happened next. Rosa opened it and looked at his face and understood immediately. "It is done," he said. "The deal is made. You and Tommy are safe." Rosa stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. "Tommy is asleep. I have tea." They sat at the kitchen table, the one with the cardboard under the short leg, and drank tea in the quiet apartment. The city hummed outside. The stove light was on. For a while neither of them said anything, and it was the kind of nothing that is full rather than empty. Then Rosa said, "I do not want to be something you gave things up for. I want to be someone you build things with." Marco set down his cup. "Then let me," he said. "Let me try. I do not know how to be easy or soft, but I know I do not want to go back to what things were before that Tuesday." Rosa looked at the table, then at him. "You have to be honest with me. About everything. Even the parts that are hard to say." "I know. And you have to eat real food sometimes." He almost smiled. "I can try. And Tommy likes comics. If you are going to be here, you have to at least make an effort." The smile arrived, the slow one, the real one, the one that was still new enough to be notable. "I already asked Silver to find out which ones are his favorites." Rosa laughed. Not the professional laugh, not the quick bright one from across the restaurant. The real one, the deep one that came from somewhere that had decided it was safe. It filled the small kitchen. It filled the space between them. Marco sat in the sound of it like a person who has been cold for a long time and has finally stepped into warmth and is remembering what warmth felt like. 6 months is a short time for some things and a long time for others, and everything depends on what fills it. Tommy's school fees were covered the month after Rosa took a new position at a restaurant with better hours and better pay. The interview had come through a manager who had heard good things and made a call, and though no one ever confirmed who had ensured those good things were heard, Rosa had walked into that interview and gotten the job with her own answers to their own questions, and that was the part that mattered to her. She still worked. She liked working. She liked what it built and what it meant and what it allowed her to give Tommy without owing anyone for it. Marco ate breakfast now. Real breakfast at a table on purpose. Every Saturday Tommy brought a new cereal chosen on the scientific basis of the box design. The more chaotic the cartoon, the stronger the recommendation, and Marco ate a bowl of it with deep seriousness while Tommy watched for a verdict. Every week Marco said they were terrible. He had not found one he actually disliked. Silver had a book in his inside jacket pocket. A paperback with a cracked spine, the kind that happens when you read something more than once. Rosa had given it to him after he mentioned, once in passing, that he used to read before a certain chapter of his life and had somehow stopped. He would not confirm how many times he had read it. He was on his third. Marco still carried the old photograph of his mother in his jacket pocket. He always would. Some things do not become less important when other things become important. They coexist, they layer, they become part of the same story told across different years. But behind it now lived a second photograph. Taken by Tommy on a Saturday morning, tilted slightly because Tommy had not fully figured out framing, his thumb partly covering the lens. It showed Rosa at the kitchen table with her head back laughing. It showed Marco with a bowl of cereal and an expression of genuine bafflement directed at the cartoon tiger on the box. It showed the table with the cardboard under the short leg, the stove light on, the ordinary morning warmth of a kitchen that had become, over 6 months of Saturdays and cereal and crooked photographs, something that both of them had quietly and without announcement decided to call home. It was the worst composed photograph Marco Bellini had ever owned. He looked at it every single day. He had built the empire piece by piece, in the years after his mother died and his father left him with a name and a responsibility and the particular loneliness of someone who has learned to lead without ever learning to stay. He had made the walls thick because thick walls do not fall. He had kept the distance because the distance felt like control and control had felt for a very long time like the only safe thing. It took one rainy Tuesday. One woman on a cold floor counting compressions out loud, talking to a stranger, refusing to leave, choosing to stay. Not because anyone asked her to, not because there was anything in it for her, but because it was simply and completely the right thing to do. One moment where the shape of love looked exactly like someone who would not give up. He had walked into La Stella that night looking for a dinner meeting and he had walked out. Slowly, across weeks of soup and hot chocolate and hallway conversations and arguments and silence and truth, carrying something he had not gone looking for. Something that did not announce itself. Something that had simply waited, patient and unhurried, until he was standing still enough to feel it. The strongest thing he had ever done was not any of the things the city knew him for. The strongest thing was sitting down on a cold hallway floor in an expensive coat and saying, "Tell me about Tommy." The strongest thing was letting someone see him and not moving when they looked. Rosa Chun had not saved one person on that rainy Tuesday night. She had, without knowing it, saved 2. This story was made for someone like you. If Heart First Empire Second found something in you, if you felt Rosa's exhaustion and her strength, if you felt Marco's walls come down one brick at a time, if Tommy made you smile at the cereal and the flashlight and the flowers, then this story did exactly what it was supposed to do. Share it with someone who needs it today. The friend who is holding everything together alone. The person who forgot that being strong and letting someone in are not opposites. The one in your life who deserves to read about a love that was built slowly, honestly, and without apology. Drop it in the group chat. Send it in a message. Post it somewhere someone who needs it will find it. And if you want more stories like this one, real characters, real emotion, love that earns itself one honest moment at a time, leave a comment below and tell us. Who moved you most? Was it Rosa, who never stopped working? Marco, who finally sat down? Or Tommy, who knew about the yellow flowers all along? We read every single comment. Everyone. More stories are coming. Stay close.